Now that we've learned a little bit about functions, let's go back and make some improvements to our Beattles application that we had made before. So when we left off, we had created two unordered lists, and we gave one the ID of musicians and one the ID of instruments, and each list item then was holding either a musician's name or an instrument that they played. Using arrays and loops, we were able to fill those arrays up with their respective item or piece of information, and then we were able to print them out. Now, taking advantage of functions, we can actually abstract away some of this information and get rid of some of the repetitive parts of the code by encapsulating it into a single function. So let's go ahead and start off by looking at the parts of our code that are essentially the same. Right off the bat, there are some similarities here between this particular block of code and this particular block of code. So here we're looking for a particular unordered list, but for both of them we're finding list items. And we're both calling each on them to iterate over each list item. And we're creating some type of variable to store the text inside of the list item, and then we're calling upon some array, whether it's musicians and or instruments, and then we're pushing into that array whatever item or that variable that we've created here. I think what I'm going to do is create a function then to encapsulate this. So let's go ahead and create a function, and I'm going to name this one build array, because this function will essentially build an array out of those list items. And then here in the arguments, I'm going to pass in the parts of this that are going to change. So the main structure of this is exactly the same, but what's actually different here is the element that we're selecting changes, and also the array that we are selecting here. So those are two parameters I can pass in. So for the element, I'll just say $ELE for a jQuery element, and then I'm going to put a comma and just say array, which will represent, one of the arrays, either the musicians array or the instruments array. And then we'll go ahead and say element.find, and we're going to find list items inside of it. Okay, and for each list item, right, we're going to run a function. So here we just have sort of an anonymous function that's running inside of this each loop. That's perfectly fine to nest a function inside of another function like that. So we've basically repeated this part here, but we've abstracted away this part. The element is now called $ELE, and we're going to pass that in. Okay, and then here we have a variable. So we'll say var, and this time I'm just going to call it item, because sometimes it will be a musician and sometimes it will be an instrument. Okay, so we'll say item equals $this dot text. And again, this is representing the individual instance of a list item, right, that we're iterating over using the each loop, and then dot text will grab the text out of it. Okay, and then we want to push that item into the array. Okay, so again, I'm just copying this part here and abstracting away the item and the array name. Okay, so in order to call this function to run, we just have to pass in this part and the name of the array. So for example, if I call build array, so I can just call the function by typing in the name of the function, and then for the first parameter for $ELE, or in other words the jQuery element, we're going to use this one, musicians, like that, and then I'll put a comma and the name of the array, which will be the musicians array here. Okay, just like that. So now I can delete this, and we can run the build array function again, but this time we want to pass in instruments here instead of musicians, right? And we also want to pass in the instruments array, like that. So now I can delete this one. So what we've done here is we've abstracted away those two blocks of code into this single function that will build the arrays for us. And then we're calling it twice here for each of the array's musicians and instruments. Now, I guess we could also put this guy into its own function in case we wanted to call that again. So we could go ahead and create another function here and call it print. And we'll just paste in this for loop here. So then to run all of this code at the bottom here, we can just say print. Okay, so now we have 3 function calls here using these 2 functions and these variables. And it's nice and neat and clean. And these actions are repeatable. We can repeat these as many times as we want. So if we click run, you can see that nothing's really changed in the output of the code.